What is up, guys? Back in the garage one more time. I got the puppers out here with me. They're going crazy. They want to stay in and leave at the same time. Story of my life, right? Guys across the street are having the party. We left the truck parked out on the street because I had some issues with that. I brought it home after doing the wheels and tires, and it sat in the driveway for a week and a half. No problems there. Fired right up, ran fine. Tires are working better. It's still got a slight leak, so I gotta actually look a little bit closer at the tire. Would have made a lot of sense to do that while I had the tire off and spinning it on the balancer, but I didn't. I rushed through it, got it back together because we had to go pick the boat up from the water or whatever it was. Either way, truck's back home now, running okay, but this morning I drove it to school, fired it up, choke was high idle. Electronic choke on there on the Summit 500 carb. That is the first carburetor issue that I've had on that vehicle in a year and a half, almost 2 years. So I think I bought that, probably a year and a half. Haven't had any issues mechanically on that carburetor setup at all. The high speed fast idle was a little bit higher. I never dropped it from when I set it up. That's on me, just dealt with it. But typically I fired it up, one squirt of gas, turn the key, lights off, one rotation of the motor, and then we'll rev somewhere around 2 to 2200 RPMs on fast idle. Blip the throttle after about 30 seconds and it kicks down to about 1400, and then blip the throttle again after it warms up a little bit and she straightens herself out. Tried doing that today on the way to work. It didn't straighten itself out. Instead it went back to fast idle over and over and over again. So I drove to work with my truck idling at about 2300 RPMs. Terrible. Tried doing a quick adjustment on the choke, which again, for a problem to just immediately present itself, don't do that. I did everything wrong to try and fix a problem, knowing full well that I haven't had to touch the thing in a year and a half. So I went through and kept blipping the throttle, trying to get the idle to come back down. Didn't. It got hung up on the fast idle, which in my head is just the linkages are a little bit crusty or gummed up or oil misted and needs a little bit of cleanup. So instead of doing the right thing, which is just cleaning everything up and not changing or adjusting settings on stuff, I messed with it. Ended up clocking the choke, and this has happened twice now. First time I figured it was just kind of a fluke. Second time, well, it is getting a lot colder in the mornings when I leave for work at 6:30 in the morning. It's still dark out. Way colder than it has been all summer. So jammed on that, blasted the choke apart, ended up taking it off, reclocked the spring, adjusted it, put everything back together. It's fixed now. I did put the PCV breather valve back on and swapped it over with the PCV valve out of the 350 Chevy. It's a little loose, but it works way better than the old one did. And essentially the breather valve, I got the hot roddy vented breather on one side and then an open vent on the other valve cover. Not happy. So that breather valve that I have is not holding enough vacuum. I could back the idle screw, the curb idle, all the way out, and it was just maintaining like a 1300 idle. Swapped in the factory PCV valve out of the Chevy. It dropped back down to 800-900, right where it wants to be for that setup. So that's fixed. But that's not what we're here for, so sorry for the long-winded rant on the truck. It's back home, it's fixed. I'm probably gonna take the Falcon tomorrow, but the truck is returning to idle like it's supposed to. And here's the Evo. So where we left off, we got cylinders done, heads done, rocker boxes done, starter stuff is wired. It looks like crap in terms of wiring, but whatever. It's done, everything's working. Don't have the coil hooked up yet, so we got 2 leads for the coil. I got a white one here and a red, which I think red is supposed to be the blue and white is supposed to be white. Gotta double check how I have this routed. Yeah, white, no, what did I do here? Red wire here with the yellow connector comes down, runs down here, yellow goes to blue, white goes to a black and white. So one of these is constant 12 volt, the other ones are trigger for the pickup. Not that big of a deal. Then yesterday, ran into clutch issues on the brand new Motion Pro expensive tool. The tool works awesome. Do not let me criticize that negatively. The tool is very nice compared to the cheapo other one that I already had. Had I known that these were going to be the exact same, I would have just used this again. So that was a waste of $70, but lucky for me, I do enough customer work and enough random oddball jobs that I don't mind spending money and having a better tool. So when the time comes and I have a newer Sporty to put together, that will come in handy. Just post 90, I guess. Not that I want to do a lot more Sporties, but didn't work on that. So we got creative and used some of the PVC spacers and clutch tools that I fabbed up a little while back. These worked just fine. The issue you run into is this clutch detent right here. This needs to go on the inside to push the washer and give you enough room to get the snap ring. So what I ended up using was, I did use the new tool, but this sat on top and drove this center section in. The next V-twin order I place for gaskets and parts when I get around to doing the Evo motor or iron head motor that's in the box over there, I'll order up the new adapter that drops in on here. I think it's like 20, 30 bucks or something. But we'll get that all ordered up because I want to have the right tools to adjust stuff like this. I got two buddies of mine with late 80s, early pre-90 Sporties, so it'd be nice to have the tool. Tonight, I don't have that long, and I'm still way behind on editing from all of this. So I just saw in the comments for the last video that posted earlier today, asking about where did the metal shaving come from. Well, if you go farther back on this Evo playlist, I go through the fire up, I go through the lack of oil up to the head, the weak oil pump that should have been my red flag to shut the motor down and figure out why it's not getting oil. I ignored it. Ran it for a while, ate the pistons in the bore, so now we have 5 over brand new reboard pistons and cylinders on here. I didn't replace anything, I just sent them to the machine shop, but we only had to go 5 over on the jugs. Tonight's goal, we're just gonna button up this primary side. I don't know, maybe primary and clutch cable, we'll see. So let me throw you guys on the tripod and we'll start jamming away on this work because I am talking way too much. When I was putting the cam chest on this motor the other day, went to put the cam gasket on, I ran out of it. Well, I didn't run out, but gasket cinch. I like using this stuff. It's basically just an adhesive glue. It sets up, it's a little tacky. You can see a little bit of the residue from that on the cases here, that yellowing around the outside. It's just a clear glue. It's not an RTV, it's not a silicone. You don't have to worry about this stuff squishing into the inside of the case and clogging up all the oil passages or anything like that. But ran out of this, so I ordered some more. This has gone up quite a bit in price, depending on where you go to shop for it. Amazon, these were still only 10 bucks. Everywhere else I've looked, these have gotten really expensive. So keep that in mind. I think these are 20 on V-twin. I don't know what it is at the parts store. But it's essentially just a gasket sealer, which you put it on, give it a second, it'll tack up, you can press the gasket on, it'll stay where it needs to be, and when it squishes, it looks like this. So all we are doing tonight on this bike is getting the primary locked in. If I do the clutch, cool, I might just route the cable kind of up and over and let it sit. It doesn't have to fire tonight. I was gonna try and jam this out as quick as possible, but it's Justice's bike. I'm just going through the motor for him and getting everything dialed. And add to that, he's going out of town this weekend, so even if I have it done and running, it's still gonna be sitting in my garage for a little bit. So, throw you guys back on the tripod, let's throw this primary on. It's pretty straightforward. Primary, clutch, maybe clutch adjustment, and that'll be a good stopping point. Then the entire motor's buttoned up, then we just have like the weird little oddball, tedious stuff left. Back to the tripod. The motor is pretty much ready to start putting this stuff back together. But before we install anything, we got to make sure our mating surfaces are nice and clean. So, gasket scraper, you've seen this in all the other videos. We're just going to do one quick pass. It's going to drop a little bit of residue on the primary chain, but that's okay for now. So So we're just going to do a quick little scrape around the outside of this, knock off any of the old adhesive gasket material. Then I'll turn you guys off, blast this with compressed air, and reinstall. Gasket's only going to seal as good as the actual base material is, and these little carbide ones tend to work really well. So I tried them doing some car stuff, especially on the V8 blocks where there's a lot more gasket material than this. It's goofy using these, in my opinion. It's kind of weird to use these on motorcycle things because the case sealing surfaces are so thin. But when you get into car stuff, the mating surfaces are so much bigger. I do have one of these half the size too. That would alleviate a lot of those concerns, but it is what it is. You can kind of see the discoloration where it's really dark versus what we're scraping off. And that's okay. I'm dropping a ton of metal shavings right onto the primary chain. Not metal shavings, but gasket material, I mean. And then some metal shavings, it happens. But that's it. So let me hook up the air compressor line. We're gonna blast this whole primary out with air. Then we'll glue up the gaskets, get this ready to go, and start setting the primary back on here. I'll be back when I'm done with the air because it's way too loud and it blows out the mic. I don't want to blow through one of those. Grab a beer. We'll be back in a second. Brand new can, so this is what this stuff is supposed to look like. If you were watching the last video, it looked nothing like this, and this is on really tight. That's embarrassing. Probably should have just checked that first. So we'll just grab a pair of channel locks and break this seal free real quick. That's how you keep it from going bad, I guess. But this is what you're dealing with. Goopy. Figure out an appropriate way to describe this stuff. I'm a big fan of it. So we're gonna goop this all around here on the case first. This stuff is nice. I mean, if you look at the gasket surface now, we have no actual gasket material on this case that I had to scrape off other than the glue from this stuff. So it's kind of like your barrier. Another thing that does work, and I've used this on car stuff more than bikes, but on car stuff, I'll take some wheel bearing grease and just grease up the entire intake manifold gaskets where I'm constantly switching carbs or changing things up. If you take an intake manifold gasket, grease it up with some wheel bearing grease. It's kind of goofy, but it stops the gaskets from sticking to both surfaces. It's not the prettiest thing in the world, but in terms of reuse, it does work really well. We're gonna do the same thing on the primary gasket itself. Here's our primary. We do have the dowel pins still installed on here, so I'm gonna lock this on the 2 dowels. Then once it's actually in place, I'm gonna grab a little bit more of this. It's a brand new can, so I'm being a little bit more liberal than I usually am. Just to get everything stuck. So we'll jam this back on, and then I'll basically just tap this onto the rough location of where it needs to be. It's only gonna be floating for a second or two. Don't make me look bad on the internet. Gasket. I did have this on the bottom of the bin of parts, so there was a primary sitting on top of it. Just hold this for a second here. This is the boring part. If I had a funny joke to tell, I would. And while I had you guys turned off on the camera, I did also go through and I'm setting all the bolts and primary parts that we're gonna need in a second back on the outside here. Off camera, I did scrape down the primary itself too. Bragging about these nice products to use, and you don't even want to cooperate. This is why you don't want to store gaskets with stuff on top of them. Learn from what I tell you, not from what I do. As my father has always told me, do what I say, not what I do, right? It's a great application. Here is our primary cover. Hopefully I don't knock you over because the clutch is still attached. Figure out where to drop this clutch cable down here out of the way. Now we have dowel pins on both of these, plus the floaters, so line this up to your primary along with the shifter bushing and the seal, and make sure you keep your little washer on here. There's a primary leak that's pretty common here if you don't have that washer on. So line these up on the shaft, and the stud gasket is on its, okay, right here. The gasket is on the dowels. However, if you look right now, we have a little bit of a gap here. It's because I have this chain tensioner in. So lift up on the chain tensioner just a smidge, and then you'll be able to slip the primary around it. And we'll get this kind of nice and seated. And the giant pile of bolts and things that I just took out on Evos, they're not as critical, but now we'll take our primary bolts, 3/16 all the way around, and start lining some of these up. I'm going to leave the rear floating because we can shift that one a little bit. Make sure you get through the gasket appropriately. Like right now, this gasket actually dropped off the top a little bit. So what I'm going to do is grab a little pick, and we're going to reach down here and pull this primary gasket back up a smidge, like so. Get underneath it, and then we can get our bolt to line up. So we'll get all of these started all the way around, and then you can start tightening things down. I thought these were all the same length on the primary end. Slightly longer one. We'll throw that in the back here. There are some other detail parts that we're going to need to put back on here in a little bit, but we don't need them right this second. So that's all the primaries. Now I'll grab my little ratchet, electric ratchet, not impact, and start snugging some of these up. What do we got? 3/16, I think. Here. Grab that, and an extension. An extension just gives you a lot more room to get in there if you are using electric tools, instead of doing this by hand like you're supposed to. So I'm not tightening, I'm just snugging these up roughly where they need to be. We will still go in a crisscross pattern-ish. Now that everything is roughly seated and torqued, now I will grab my impact. We're just going to give one quick little brap all the way around on here. There is a torque spec for these. Use it. But now that I got the extension on, we'll go around. I like to start at the bottom-ish, work my way out a little bit. So now our primary is reinstalled. I'm going to cap our gasket glue pretty tight so that doesn't dry out on us like the last one. And there you have it. Primary cover is back on. Still lots to do, so let me transition over. I'm going to turn you guys off. I'm going to get some stuff set up, and then we'll start doing the clutch and the clutch cable up top. So I got to put the cable in, or the clutch lever in. Kickstand spring, don't lose that. That was a terrible place to leave that. I'm pretty sure that somehow made it here all the way on the trailer, resting in here. So let me try and find the little circlip and the clutch lever. We'll lay this out and then throw the clutch cable back in and try and adjust the primary a little bit. We'll be right back. So we put all the 3/16 Allen keys on the primary. Before we move up to the clutch cable, I just found a little dowel pin. Before we move on to that one, I do want to finalize the rest of these. So on the primary, you have a stud that comes through, which works out really well for alignment. This one's gonna crank down right here, 9/16 up front. I just wanna snug all of these up while that gasket glue is setting up. That's a big steel stud, so that one you can lay into a little bit. And the only parts we're missing now are the shifter itself, which You should technically lube this up. This primary is still covered in oil, so it's got plenty of lube for the shifter shaft, but if you're putting a brand new seal in, grease this. It's gonna make it way easier slipping through. And then the foot peg goes from here to here with this nut on the outside. There's probably a washer there, but I don't know if I have that. So that's it on the primary. Let's go up to the clutch lever. I have 0 ways to make this view any better than what it is right now. So you guys are kind of looking into the light. Clutch lever's right here. I apologize about the light in the background. I just don't have anywhere else to put you guys. So on the clutch itself, here's our lever. This is going to drop through here like so. And on a Sportster, the stupid clutch design is independent. So we are going to drop the cable roughly into here. And then you get this little roll pin dealio for the pivot point. So we're going to drop this through, kind of like so. There's going to be a ton of slack and a ton of slop on here. I don't know where my actual clutch pin went. So we're going to mess with this in a little bit, but as of right now, we're going to drop this into the groove and slide this back up. There is a little roll pin with a little tiny C-clip that goes on the inside pin, but the clutch cable pin is the plasticky one. So right there should be pretty close. Then what I'm going to do is just drop a bolt through the actual leverage point. So here's our leverage point. This should be a pin, but I got a bolt up there for right now just because I didn't see it in the box and I don't want to waste a bunch of time here. Your clutch adjuster on the cable is right here, usually covered up by this little stretchy rubber piece. And that's kind of where we're at. Now, back to the primary. The lever is roughly installed, the cable's fixed to the outer cover. So, let me show you guys what to do down here. Evo clutch things. So, we have this little push rod right here. Now, there's a lot of moving parts on the clutch assembly. So on the inside of this, I probably should have gone into more detail, but you have a little 3-ball ramp plate. Then we have this guy that's slotted. It's slotted so it goes over the push rod adjuster, okay? And then it's shouldered on the inside. Essentially what we have is the cable that comes through. We have a push rod. This is also threaded. Here's our threaded end. Notice the little bushing here. The bushing threads onto the clutch push rod, which is also a free spinning part. So here's the bushing. Here's a tiny screwdriver that fits in here. We are going to back off, or at least lock in the push rod, and then we're going to start threading this down. This is our inner jam nut. It's shouldered to ride in this little case area. Put this down until it starts bottoming out on the actual little plate. Now, I'm going to back tension off of this bolt. And when I do this, this is essentially pulling the push rod out and putting this in. And if you notice, I'm off the alignment right now, so I'm going to go half a turn in, swing this over. You want that to lock into the ramp plate and seat on the inside of this. We're going to keep backing tension off. So I'm going counterclockwise on the adjuster as far as I can right now. So right now, that's when I start to feel a little bit of drag. Okay, right there. So I'll leave that as is. Now, before you do anything else, go up to your clutch cable, take your slack out. So right now this clutch cable is actually backed out pretty far. I want to have a ton of adjustment in the actual clutch cable itself. So right now clutch is fully engaged. We're nowhere near where we're supposed to be down here. So we'll go back to the push rod, grab our screwdriver, back this out, keep backing it out, keep backing it out, keep backing it out. Okay, so now it's dragging. It was free spin until now. So there is resistance. We're gonna go half a turn in. Right there. Now we get to play with the extra parts of this. So we got half a turn of free play on that clutch. This isn't perfect because this clutch cable is not ideal for this setup. We're just kind of making it work. So here's your cap, here's your spring. This should all stay like this. This spring keeps the little adjuster locking retainer in there, so you don't have to jam tighten these down. This one's free floating. This drops into our spring like so, like this, and goes on this way. So the spring rides in the little collar. This rides facing out, not in. So that shoulder on the bolt basically keeps spring tension on this, and then this is going to drop into the clutch, like so. And then, if you notice, there's no resistance on this threading all the way in. So I'm just gonna get this to snug or seat, like so. This is way better than it was. Do not do this if you're trying to take care of your own bike. Don't use a flathead and a hammer and beat the crap out of it like I do. But this piece is already messed up. I have a new one on order. We're replacing the plug. So, I don't really care about this one. Now, if we go up top, or to the clutch cable, here's our adjuster. We're still pretty far out, so we're like 1.5 inches on the adjuster. But, oh yeah. Look at that. That's how your clutch is supposed to feel. In and out, in and out, in and out. So make sure your parts are all in the right way. Here's what you want. Your clutch lever should come right in, snap back, right in, snap back. Obviously, we still need to change this bolt, get the actual correct parts for that. We'll go through the final adjustment parts down here, but this is a busted up, mangled lever, so that's too much play to me. Adjusting this out a little bit more. I'm limited, I'm at the end of the cable. So that's about all we got. That's where she's gonna be, because I'm out of clutch adjustment, but it feels really good. And then, if you wanna go through and test it, grab your little shifter shaft, spline this on, clicking this down now, rotating the wheel over. Come on, engage. Oh, I don't have the drive chain hooked up. This isn't gonna work. I was gonna say, don't do that. Make sure it's splined in all the way. I left the bolt in, so that didn't work. But if you're gonna check it, make sure the drive chain's engaged, because now I can engage the transmission through the gears. I won't have any drag on the rear wheel until you hook up your drive chain, which I only have hooked up. So that's where we're gonna leave this one off. I said I would be out here for 45 minutes. I think I'm right on track for that tonight. I'm gonna go in, eat some dinner. We'll be back out, keep jamming away on this. I was gonna try and have this done and running in like 2-3 days. Might turn into a couple videos and the weekend by the time you guys see it, but nothing on here is final assembled outside of the actual base case itself. I'm still gonna have to mess with the clutch and adjust this when we get farther along, once I get the drive chain hooked up and everything else actually properly functioning. But this is mechanically the end of the external parts of the motor that need to be assembled. Clutch adjustments don't count to me. This little plug we're going to replace, and like I said, I'm going to have to adjust that periodically. The only other thing I have left on the outside of the motor is the oil filter, but I'm waiting to put the oil filter on. I have it sitting right here. I grabbed the right one from the shop. We have the oil filter, and I need to pull, just because we did have an oil starvation problem, I'm going to take this oil pressure light switch out of the motor and crank this over a ton, which would have been really nice to do before we just buttoned up the whole primary. Whoops. We'll drain the battery and play with the starter and crank it over for a while. It won't take, or in theory, it shouldn't take that long to fill up, especially now that we've had 2 days of gravity from the oil tank down to the feed side of the pump. So we'll play with the starter instead of kicking it over by hand, or I can put the drive chain on, pull the plugs, leave it in 4th gear, and start rolling it over until we get at least a couple drops coming out of the oil pressure gauge. Thanks for watching. We will catch you on the next one. Lots more on this stupid bike coming your way. Trying to finish this up so I can spend more time on the iron head. That's more fun to me. Catch you soon.